One of my favorite Christmas gifts growing up was a Hot Wheels set called Holiday Rods. It was this limited edition set with 4 cars. They were cars I could race against my friends on those bright orange tracks. We all grew up with things that meant something to us. For some, it was He-Man action figures. For others, probably Barbie dolls. Or maybe even sitting around with family playing Uno and getting way too competitive over a card game. What's kind of wild is that so many of these toys you and I grew up loving came from the same place, a company called Mattel. So here's the interesting story of them. Mattel was founded in 1945 inside a small garage workshop, founded by this couple, Ruth and Elliot Handler, along with Harold Matt Matson. The name Mattel was stitched together from Matt in Matson and L in Elliot. But the original business had nothing to do with toys. They were making picture frames and small giftware.
And I started making little giftware items in that shop.
And one of his designs really took off. It was a hand made out of lucite or plexiglass.
And the idea was to put a little water and then put a flower in there and pin it on. And this thing turned out to be a great success.
But their breakthrough came when Elliot started using leftover wood scraps to make miniature dollhouse furniture. The first line was a small set of 4 chairs and a little square plastic table. Soon, the small side product quickly outgrew the picture frame business. They were making thousands of dollars selling these miniature furniture. So they shifted their focus to toys. By 1947, Mattel had its first successful toy, a ukulele called the Yuka-Doodle. By this point, Harold Matson had sold his share of the company due to poor health, and Ruth Handler took over his shares. But Mattel's real turning point came in 1955 through Walt Disney's Mickey Mouse Club show.
Hi, gang. Do you recognize this mouse guitar? It's just like the one the Mouseketeers gave me. And now Mattel toy makers, the people who made my mouse guitar, have a big surprise for you.
This was the ad which played during the show about their guitar toy, but this was a huge gamble for the Handlers. At the time, Mattel was still a young company, and they had to spend $500,000 to sponsor the show. The show aired 6 times, and nothing happened. The decision looked like a disaster, and the Handlers were losing their minds. But after 6 weeks, everything changed. Mattel's office was suddenly packed with orders and reorders, and the Handlers were back in business. This success had a huge impact on the toy industry. Before this, toy companies mostly advertised during Christmas, but Mattel began advertising year-round. They used TV to build a brand children would remember. And by 1962, Mattel was spending $5.7 million on advertising alone, more aggressively than almost any other company in the toy industry. This helped turn Mattel from a small toy company into one of America's biggest toy brands. You can tell it's Mattel, it's swell, became one of the most recognizable toy advertising taglines of its time. But the real turning point in Mattel's story came in 1959. When Mattel launched the most iconic toy ever, Barbie. Even today, Barbie carries a kind of nostalgia that goes far beyond the doll itself. And the brain behind Barbie was Ruth Handler.
I had observed my daughter Barbara playing with her friends on the floor by the hour. They would play with adult paper dolls. I tried to convince Elliot that we could make a 3-dimensional doll and create such play patterns. And he said it'd be impossible.
At the time, most dolls for girls were baby dolls. They were built around care, motherhood, and nurturing. Ruth wanted something different. She wanted to give girls a vision of adulthood. But the real inspiration behind Barbie was not exactly child-friendly. During one of her vacations in Europe, Ruth came across a German doll called Build Lily. But unlike Barbie, Build Lily was not made for children. She came from a comic in the German tabloid Bild. The character was written as a sharp adult woman who used wealthy men for clothes, gifts, and money. The doll was sold at newsstands, not toy shops. But Ruth saw something else in it. So she brought a dozen Lily dolls back to the US, and 3 years later, the first Barbie dolls hit the shelves. Barbie was an instant success. Little girls went crazy for her, and over time, she became one of the most successful toys ever created, with more than 1 billion dolls sold in over 150 countries since her debut in 1959. But Barbie was never just a doll. She became a pop culture icon. Mattel carefully built an identity around her. Barbie was fashion, adulthood, imagination, and the idea that a girl could become anything. And Mattel knew exactly how to turn that idea into repeat purchases. They established what Elliott Handler called the razor and razor blade technique. The idea is that once a child had the doll, they needed clothes from lingerie to wedding gowns. Then they needed more accessories and doll houses. And Mattel was sure to sell all of them separately. Handler even said it openly, "You get hooked on one and you have to buy the other." For Handler's toys were about making money. There was sentiment on the outside, but behind it was a cutthroat business machine. Parents hated it, but they didn't care much. He even blamed it on the parents, stating, "We feel it's up to the parents to handle the child." So, Mattel kept expanding the world. First came Ken, named after the handler's son. Then came Midge, Barbie's friend, and Skipper, her younger sister. Barbie was no longer just one toy on a shelf. She had a life, a social circle, and an entire universe around her. By the 1960s, Mattel became a prominent player in the toy industry and was growing fast. They entered the infant and preschool market by acquiring Fisher-Price. They are behind the toys like Little People, Chatter Telephone, Rock-a-Stack, and so many more. The deal became one of the company's most important long-term assets. Then, Mattel changed the toy market again with a revolutionary toy called Chatty Cathy. Chatty Cathy was a pull-string talking doll with 11 different phrases, which later grew to 18 phrases. And it quickly became one of the most popular dolls of that time, second only to Barbie. This pushed Mattel closer to the top of the toy industry. But if Mattel wanted to own the whole toy aisle, they needed to win over boys too. So they created Hot Wheels. The idea came when Mr. Elliott Handler saw his son Kenneth playing with Matchbox cars. At the time, Matchbox was already popular, known for realistic miniature vehicles. But Elliott saw an opportunity. He wanted cars that looked faster, louder, and cooler than anything kids had seen before. So he teamed up with engineer Jack Ryan and began developing a new kind of toy car. In 1968, Mattel unveiled the first Hot Wheels collection at the New York Toy Fair. They were called the original Sweet 16. These cars had big rear tires, flame paint jobs, superchargers, hood blowers, and wild proportions. Hot Wheels were a huge success, as you would have guessed. And just like Barbie's accessories and dollhouses, Hot Wheels also had something to keep the kids in the loop. It was the orange racetrack. The tracks were the real selling point as it created a sense of adventure and racing experience. Kids like me stretched those bright orange tracks across bedroom floors, launched cars through loops, crashed into walls, and lived inside the excitement of one more race. All of this gave Mattel a huge boost. It was no longer a small company built by a couple with one clever toy idea. Mattel had gone public, built massive brands like Barbie and Hot Wheels, and became one of the biggest names in the toy industry. But that is also where things started to fall apart. By the early 1970s, the US economy was under pressure. The 1973 oil crisis and recession hurt consumer spending, especially on non-essential products like toys. And after the massive success of Barbie and Hot Wheels, Mattel struggled to find its next big hit. The company launched new toy lines, but many of them failed to capture the public's imagination or generate serious sales. So to keep the image of growth alive, Mattel did the unthinkable. In the 1970s, an investigation found that the company had issued false and misleading financial reports. Sales were inflated nearly by $10 million, making Mattel look healthier than it really was. The scandal was a huge blow to the company and its founders. Ruth and Elliot Handler were forced out of the company for misleading investors and falsifying financial records. The damage was massive. Mattel's stock plunged from over $50 to around $2. But the company did not collapse completely. Arthur S. Spear, then Mattel vice president, took control and brought the company back to profitability within 2 years. By then, the toy industry was changing again. The world was moving toward electronic games and video games, and Mattel wanted in. So the company created Mattel Electronics. In 1977, it launched its first handheld LED games, and the big breakout hit was Football 1. Some of you might remember it, a simple LED football game where you moved a tiny player left and right, dodging tackles and blocks. By early 1978, Mattel was producing hundreds of thousands of units a week. But the success did not last long. When the North American video game crash hit in 1983, Mattel Electronics became one of its first major victims. The division shut down, caused a massive $394 million loss, and pushed Mattel dangerously close to bankruptcy. And while the company was struggling internally, Barbie was facing a different kind of crisis outside. For years, Barbie was criticized for promoting unrealistic beauty standards. And after the rise of second-wave feminism, that criticism only got louder. Feminists at UC Berkeley burned Barbie dolls as a symbol of sexist beauty ideals and male oppression. They protested outside the toy fairs and accused Barbie of pushing girls toward appearance instead of intellect. So, over time, Mattel tried to change the image of Barbie. The company introduced its first Hispanic Barbie and African American Barbie in the 80s. Over time, Mattel introduced different Barbies reflecting skin tones, wheelchairs, prosthetic limbs, Down syndrome, and even type 1 diabetes. But none of these changes helped Mattel in the long run. By the early 1980s, the company was struggling again. The 1981 recession made toys harder for parents to afford, and growing competition put even more pressure on the business. Then, Mattel found its next major hit: He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. He-Man quickly became the boys' version of Barbie and helped pull Mattel back from serious financial trouble. It became one of the company's biggest toy lines of the 1980s, making over $100 million in its launch year. That success was followed by the animated series He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which made the brand even bigger. The new financial stability gave Mattel room to grow again. But this time, the company did not just rely on creating new toys. The 1990s became a period of rapid expansion and acquisitions for Mattel. One of its first major moves was entering the card game business by acquiring International Games, the company behind Uno and Skip-Bo. And under CEO John Ammerman, they took it to the next level. In 1997, Mattel bought Tyco Toys for around $1.3 billion. That brought it brands like Matchbox, Viewmaster, and Tommy Trains. Next year, they bought Pleasant Company, the maker of American Girl, for around $700 million. But Mattel's biggest bet was the Learning Company, which cost them around $3.5 to $4.2 billion. It was Mattel's hope to enter educational software. But the deal was a massive disaster, and within a year, Mattel sold it off at a massive loss. All of this pushed them under intense pressure. Companies like Hasbro and Lego were fighting for children's attention, and Mattel needed to move faster, produce cheaper, and protect its margins. So the company went deeper into outsourced manufacturing. By 2002, Mattel had closed its last factory in the United States. But that decision came with a cost. In 2007, Mattel made one of the worst mistakes a toy brand could make. it was forced to recall around 20 million toys in just a few weeks. The major reason was excessive lead paint in toys, while some had loose magnets that could be dangerous if swallowed. Many of the recalled toys were manufactured in China, and the crisis hit major lines like Polly Pocket, Barbie playsets, Doggy Daycare, One Piece, and Batman. This was massive for Mattel because the toy industry was already changing. Children were slowly moving away from traditional toys and into the digital world. Online games and multiplayer gaming became the new mode of play, and these manufacturing defects pushed Mattel away from kids even more. And by 2010, smartphones and tablets became common inside homes. This pushed the toy industry into an even harder position. They were now competing with online characters and gameplays. For Mattel, this was a serious problem. The company had already tried and failed to move into the digital world with Mattel Electronics, so Mattel shifted its focus to a new kind of customer: adults. The company understood that people who grew up with Barbie, Hot Wheels, Uno, and Fisher-Price were no longer children. They were adults with money, memory, and emotional attachment to these brands. So Mattel started selling nostalgia. Mattel launched premium Barbie lines priced above $100 for serious collectors, along with lower-priced collector dolls for casual adult fans who had grown up with Barbie. But Mattel kept production numbers limited, so the dolls felt rare, held resale value, and encouraged trading in the secondary market. Instead of seeing resale as competition, Mattel used it to make Barbie feel more valuable. And the strategy became much bigger in 2021 with the launch of Mattel Creations, a direct-to-consumer platform built for adult collectors. Through limited edition drops, artist collaborations, and exclusive releases, Mattel turned nostalgia into a serious business. But Mattel knew the collector's economy alone could not sustain the company forever. It had to adapt. Mattel rebuilt its digital strategy. They partnered with NetEase to create Mattel 163, the studio behind games like Uno Mobile, Phase 10, Skip-Bo, and Uno Wonder. The studio reached more than 550 million players and around 20 million monthly active users. Mattel also pushed its brands into bigger gaming spaces, including Barbie, Hot Wheels, Monster High, Masters of the Universe, and Uno across console, PC, and platforms like Roblox. Then, in 2026, Mattel moved even further by agreeing to buy NetEase's stake in Mattel 163, giving itself full control of its mobile gaming studio. If children were moving from toy boxes to screens, Mattel was going to follow them there, and it used its biggest asset to do it. In 2023, Mattel partnered with Warner Bros. To release its first live-action Barbie movie. The film became a global blockbuster and grossed over $1.4 billion worldwide. The movie's success boosted sales and proved Mattel's bet on Barbie's cultural and nostalgic value. But once the hype faded, toy sales could not keep up. By 2024, Mattel's net sales had fallen 4%. Its dolls category dropped 14%, mainly because Barbie demand weakened. The Barbie movie worked because Barbie was already massive. She had decades of cultural meaning, nostalgia, and emotional baggage behind her. The audience brought all of that into the theater. But Mattel never really figured out how to turn that cultural moment into a long-term toy demand. And now with the new live-action Masters of the Universe reboot set to hit theaters, things are looking tense for the company. He-Man will test whether Mattel can repeat the same formula as Barbie. For decades, Mattel decided what children played with. Now, it is trying to survive in a world where childhood has moved from toys to screens. The same toys that once defined generations are no longer enough on their own. Mattel may not be the cultural giant it used to be, but it still owns the memories. And now, through movies, nostalgia, and a bigger IP strategy, the company is trying to pull both kids and adults back into the worlds it created. So, the real question is, can He-Man and the Masters of the Universe save Mattel? If you like this story, be sure to like and subscribe. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.